Welcome to the Life of Hair. Today's episode, we've got a really fantastic, interesting technique for you all to see. The brief here was to cool the hair down. It got a little bit warm. My client tops up her roots at home, which I'm perfectly happy for her to do. But over the summer, it lifted a little bit. It's come up to level 7. It's brought into some really warm colours into her hair, which you can actually see better now as I'm going through. So the brief was kind of cool it down, but also add in some dimension back into the hair, because the hair ultimately was looking all one colour, as you saw there in the beginning. Now, the technique that we're using here is a really, really simple technique, and it's one that if you use it yourself, you will just love the results, because, well, I don't think it gets any easier for a conversion from somebody who's got very, 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 very warm hair that you need to colour all of the hair, but you need to add dimension in simultaneously. From a speed perspective, this technique's really, really fantastic, and it's one that I use day in, day out. Now, I'm using the Fremar kind of, I think it's called an Emperor brush, which is a great tool for this particular technique. And what we're doing is we're painting the roots and we're stretching them up towards the occipital bone as we come down, past the occipital bone, which is the bone at the back of the head, for those of you who are unsure what that is. And then we're using the comb side to then bring the product down. And we're just making sure that we angle our comb going into the hair at about a 45-degree angle roughly. And this just makes sure that we don't leave any heavy marks or demarcations in the hair as we travel through. However, in this particular instance, it is not the most important part of the technique, because we are going to colour all of the hair as we travel through the technique anyway. So don't get too concerned if you accidentally create a mark or a line in the hair with the root colour. It will be fixed as we travel through this particular technique. Do not worry about that. And I think one of the things that I love about this technique is that it's absolutely foolproof. There is just no real way to get it wrong. Now, like all techniques, if you've never done them before, they require a little bit of practice. And one thing that you do need to remember is that you need to put the hair roughly in the parting of which it's going to be worn. You know, not exactly, but as close as you can get it without it being too much of a drama. Now, on to kind of the main event of this technique. And one of the things I love about this technique is the sheer simplicity of it. And we're going to take a horizontal section that is about 2.5 inches in depth, and we're going to weave out 3 pieces at the top here and 2 pieces at the bottom. Now, as the sections get wider, we may change that. As we go further up the head, we might make them a little bit more narrower in terms of the depth of the weave, but underneath we certainly want to add dimension, and we want a slightly chunkier effect. So we're going to do a really chunky weave, and it's not going to look chunky in the end. You'll see as we get to the end of this technique, it just looks beautiful, blended, seamless. One of my absolute all-time favourite balayage techniques, and I think one that everybody should have in the bag. Now, then we go through, once we've put our dimension in, our darker colour, as you've seen from that previous section, and this is our bleach. We're going to apply it to the mid-lengths, and then we use our hand to blend the product up towards the root area, and we saturate through the ends to create maximum coverage, maximum lift, but we just leave it to air process. Now, a lot of you would probably want to cover this maybe, but if you can control your saturation so that you're not leaving too much product on the hair, you really, really don't have to worry too much about this particular technique needing covering. The only other time you may want to cover it is if you want to get maximum lift. Now, in this particular instance, I'm only looking for probably 3 levels of lift. If you want more than 3 levels of lift, then I highly, highly recommend you cover it. Now, you can see the weaves on these sections are still quite chunky, and that is because we need the colours to separate, to get that dimension into the hair. So we're going to put our low light colour on now. We're going to apply that low light colour, and we're going to just saturate it all the way through the underneath part of the section. Now, you could do the lighter colour on top, should you so wish. I personally generally always do the blonder colour on top. I have done the darker colour as our top section and the lighter colour as the underneath section, and what you tend to get is a slightly more subdued and subtle look. So if that's something you're going to go for, then obviously do it that way around. But in most cases, I use my lightener or my bleach as my top section. So this section and this technique is very, very simple for everybody to remember. We've split the hair into 4 quadrants, and we're just using that hand really flat and smooth. You can see how it diffuses the colour up towards the root area. Now, one thing you do have to be mindful of is that you do need to make sure that the colour is nice and evenly spread on the underneath side of the section too. So make sure you rub the back side of the section and you don't leave any hard or heavy demarcations underneath the back side of your section, because it can look a bit spotty if you don't make sure that you've rubbed that colour into the hair really, really well. But when we're onto this parting section, we are in the natural parting of which the hair is going to be worn mostly, which is in the centre for this particular client. Obviously, if she wore it on the side parting, I'd make sure that we'd be doing this section in a side parting, making sure the saturation is even and consistent all the way through. And one thing that you do need to bear in mind with this particular technique is you need a towel to hand to make sure that you keep your hands nice and clean as you travel through the sections and you're swapping between products. So final section, and all we're going to do is exactly what we did previously. One thing to mention, or one thing to think about, is that if you want some lightness around the face, you do need a section that is obviously next to the face for your lightener. You can see here that I'm just going to emphasize that front section. It's not going to be a money piece by any stretch of anyone's imagination, but I'm just creating a slight diagonal that you can see there, traveling down from that highest point around the face down towards the back hairline. Here it is for it to process, and you just process it to manufacturer's recommended time, however long that is. And you can see like the hair's gone quite hard. It's not a clay lightener, it's just a normal blue powder bleach, and this is the end result. We've cooled down the root area. We didn't want it to be ashy, we just wanted to take some of that warmth off, and then we wanted that dimension running through those ends. Now again, if you wanted more lightness, you could use cling film, foil, whatever you want to amplify the lift. You could also apply more colour higher up the hair. So the more saturation that you move up towards the scalp area, the lighter the pieces will travel into the root area. We didn't want that. We wanted just a nice subtle blend up towards the parietal ridge, which is the ridge just above the ear on the scalp or on the skull. And I think the beautiful thing about this is if you wanted more contrast or a more striking end result, you could also lower the contrast. So you could do a darker base colour. In this particular instance, we've done it on a level 6. You could do it on a level 5 and it will look absolutely knockout. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please hit the thumbs up button, and I'll see you again next week for another episode of The Life of Hair.